You know, it's funny how when you get lost these days, it's really just a temporary, like minor inconvenience.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
You pull out your phone, and a little blue dot just locates you on a digital grid, and a perfectly calm voice tells you to make a U-turn. It's an immediate, totally frictionless fix.
Right, which is a remarkably modern luxury. I mean, technology has almost entirely eliminated the uh, the existential dread of being physically untethered from the world. Like,
Yeah.
we're always on a map somewhere.
But I want you, the listener, to imagine a kind of lost where that grid itself just dissolves. You aren't just off the trail or, missing a highway exit.
Yeah, you are fundamentally disoriented.
Exactly. Disoriented in the landscape of your own life. Like
Mm.
you don't know how you got there. The environment around you is hostile. It's terrifying. And the only way out is a path you really, really do not want to take.
Which is a terrifying thought.
It really is. So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are taking you on a journey into one of the most profound um, psychological and spiritual wildernesses ever mapped.
And our mission today is to step into the shoes of literary scholars and unpack the famous opening of Dante Alighieri's Inferno, specifically Canto 1.
Right. And to navigate this without a GPS, we are using some incredibly rigorous literary maps. We've got sources from the Dartmouth College Dante Lab, historical commentary from studenti.it, and, a stack of classic translations.
And we really aren't just looking at this as a 700-year-old piece of Italian poetry.
No, not at all.
If you look at the structure and the intent behind Dante's work, it was designed to be a universal schematic of human crisis. It's basically a survival guide for the soul.
So let's just jump right into the deep end with that iconic first line. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward pathway had been lost.
It's so powerful.
It is. And the thing that immediately jumps out to me is the inclusivity. Like, he doesn't say the journey of my life. He explicitly says our life.
Yes, exactly.
He's pulling you, the reader, directly into the danger right alongside him.
That pronoun is doing an immense amount of heavy lifting there. I mean, Dante is anchoring the poem in a very specific historical reality, the spring of the Jubilee year 1300.
Right, when he was exactly 35 years old.
Precisely. Because in biblical tradition, specifically referencing the Psalms, a standard human lifespan was considered to be 70 years.
So 35 is literally the exact midway point.
Yeah, it is the apex of the arch of life. But by saying "are," he immediately demands that you see your own reflection in his crisis.
Wow.
And to achieve this, Dante operates on two completely different psychological levels simultaneously. In literary scholarship, we refer to this as the split identity of the poem. You have Dante the agent and Dante the author.
Okay, wait, I want to make sure I'm wrapping my head around this correctly. So it's essentially like telling a story about surviving a horrendous car crash.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Like the you inside the vehicle during the crash, the agents, right, the protagonist, is operating purely on panic and adrenaline. You are completely unaware of whether you're even going to survive.
Right, right.
But the you recounting the story years later at a dinner party, the author or the author has the wisdom of the completed journey. The author knows the ending and is, structuring that chaos into a narrative.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. I mean, the character is stumbling blindly through the mud while the author is organizing that stumble into mathematically perfect, symmetrical verse.
Which is just wild to think about.
And what is truly brilliant is how the authorial Dante signals this split to the reader through the subtle use of grammar, right in those opening lines.
Wait, through grammar, are we talking about the verb tenses here?
Precisely. If you look at the fourth verse, he writes, "Ah me, how hard a thing it is to say, what was this forest savage?"
Oh, it is to say.
Exactly. The authorial Dante, writing this years later from the safety of exile, shifts into the present tense. It is hard for him to even write the words now because the memory itself is a trauma.
That gives me chills.
But when he describes the physical experience of being there, he drops back into the past tense, the pathway had been lost.
He even mentions that just thinking about the forest renews the fear in his present moment. Which brings us to the setting itself, the selva oscura, the dark wood.
Yes, the dark wood.
Why a forest, though? Like, why not a desert or a stormy sea?
Well, context is everything here. In the early 1300s, vast, unmapped forests were places of genuine peril.
Right, they weren't just national parks.
No, not at all. The commentaries frequently mention the Maremma, which was this wild, tangled, malarial region in Italy. If a traveler wandered off the main road there, the threat of death was highly probable.
From, like, bandits or wolves?
Bandits, wolves, or just simple starvation. So the literal fear of the dark wood was incredibly visceral for a medieval audience.
But allegorically, he's building a landscape of the mind, right? Like the dark wood represents a state of deep moral confusion, sin, and the political disorder that was actively tearing his home city of Florence apart.
Absolutely. It's a condition of living out of alignment with your own values.
And the most terrifying part to me is that Dante admits he doesn't even know how he wandered into it. He says he was so full of slumber at the moment he abandoned the true way.
Yeah, it is the terrifying realization of waking up midway through your life and asking, how did I end up here? How did my marriage fail? How did my career become this?
It's the sleepwalking of the soul.
Exactly. But as he wakes up to this horror, the claustrophobia actually breaks for a brief moment. He looks up, and at the end of the valley, he sees a hill.
The Deletoso Monte.
Right, the Delectable Mountain.
Right.
And its shoulders are glowing with the rays of the sun.
Which feels like the ultimate symbol of rescue. But, the sun isn't just a weather feature here. The commentary notes that it is the morning of the vernal equinox, and the sun is in the constellation of Aries.
Which is a detail that carries massive theological weight.
How so?
Well, in medieval cosmology, it was believed that God created the universe and set the stars in motion at the exact moment the sun was in Aries.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it represents the dawn of creation, like the ultimate springtime.
So the universe is literally aligned for rebirth. This sunlit hill represents everything that is done. Dante is desperate for divine illumination, earthly happiness, the restoration of virtue.
That's the natural goal.
Right. He sees the light, the panic in the pit of his stomach subsides a little bit, and he naturally thinks, okay, I'll just hike out of this dark valley and get to the light. The worst is over.
But seeing the light and actually having the capacity to reach it are two very different things.
Definitely.
And this is where Dante's theology physically manifests in his body, which leads to one of the most debated lines in the entire canto.
Oh, the limping line.
Yes, he starts to climb the barren slope, and he writes that he moved so that the firm foot ever was the lower.
It's such an awkward physical description. Like,
Yeah.
if you are climbing a steep hill, your feet alternate, your weight shift.
Right, it's a fluid motion.
But here he is dragging. It almost reminds me of the physics of a nightmare.
Oh, I like that comparison.
You know that feeling where something is chasing you and you can see the safe house right at the top of the street, but your back leg feels like it's submerged in invisible concrete?
Yes, the classic nightmare run.
Exactly. You physically cannot get traction no matter how hard you push.
That visceral, heavy frustration is exactly the sensation he is evoking. But there is a deeply specific philosophical framework behind it.
Right, the Dartmouth commentary mentions this.
They do. They highlight an interpretation that traces all the way back to St. Augustine, the concept of the homo claudus, or the limping man.
How does medieval theology map onto a physical limp, though?
Well, in this Augustinian tradition, the 2 feet represent the 2 fundamental faculties of the human soul.
Okay.
The right foot represents the intellect, and the intellect is capable of looking up, recognizing the light, and understanding what is good.
But the left foot?
The left foot represents the human will. And according to this framework, the human will has been deeply wounded by original sin. It is heavy, it's corrupted, and it's anchored to base material desires.
So his brain, the right foot, is saying, look at the sun, let's climb towards salvation.
Exactly.
But his desires, the left foot, the firm foot that stays lower, are literally dragging him backward. He physically cannot climb the hill to his own salvation because his internal drive is broken.
He wants the quick fix, but he doesn't have the spiritual stamina to take it.
And just to demonstrate exactly how broken his will is, the moment he attempts to drag himself up the slope, his internal dysfunctions materialize as external threats.
Yes, the famous beasts.
Right, his path is blocked by 3 beasts: the lanza, the leone, and the lupa. A leopard, a lion, and a she-wolf.
And these aren't just random hazards of the wilderness.
No, the symbolism is highly specific here.
Very specific.
Yeah.
If you look at the book of Jeremiah in the Old Testament, chapter 5 describes a lion, a wolf, and a leopard striking down those who backslide from the truth.
Oh, so he's pulling directly from Scripture.
Yeah. In Dante's map of the soul, these 3 animals represent the 3 major categories of sin that actively prevent humanity from reaching the sunlit hill. And they actually correspond to the overarching architecture of hell itself.
Wow. So he encounters the lanza first, which is usually translated as a leopard or maybe a lynx. And it is described as incredibly swift with this beautiful spotted pelt. It's alluring.
It is. Early commentators frequently align the leopard with the sin of lust, while later, more structural interpretations link it to fraud.
Okay, fraud makes sense.
Right, the spotted maculate pelt represents the deceptive, attractive nature of deceit. It blocks his path and kind of dances around him. But interestingly, Dante isn't entirely defeated by it.
Right, because it is a beautiful spring morning, and he actually harbors this delusion that he might be able to get past it or even tame it.
Exactly. He thinks he can manage his own minor sins.
But then the leone appears, the lion. And the text says it comes at him with its head held high and with a ravenous hunger.
Yeah, ravenous hunger.
It is so fierce that it seems to make the air itself tremble.
The lion is a massive escalation. It represents pride, and in the broader structural view, the sins of violence. It is raw, aggressive, unapologetic power. It demands submission.
But the lion isn't what finally breaks him, and this is the part I find most fascinating.
It really is the turning point.
It's not the swift, deceptive leopard, and it's not the roaring, earth-shaking lion. It is the third beast, the lupa, the she-wolf.
She-wolf.
She is described as skeletal, burdened with every kind of craving in her leanness, and she absolutely shatters his hope. I mean, why is a skinny wolf treated as a more insurmountable threat than a roaring lion?
Because the she-wolf represents an entirely different class of failing. She symbolizes avarice, cupidity, and incontinence.
Incontinence.
Right, which in the classical sense means the total inability to control one's appetites. The lion represents an action, something you do or that it's done to you.
Okay.
But the she-wolf represents an unfillable void. The text explicitly says, "Never doth she glut her greedy will, and after food is hungrier than before."
Hungrier than before. I've been thinking about this mechanism. If we update the analogy, she isn't a predator that just eats you and moves on.
No, not at all.
She functions more like a modern algorithmic feed designed to capture your attention.
Oh, wow, yes.
Like the more you consume, the emptier you feel, and the more you need to keep scrolling to fill the void that the scrolling actually created. It's a relentless, self-perpetuating loop of consumption. It is a systemic cancer.
That is a phenomenal modern equivalent. And for Dante, this wasn't abstract at all.
Right, it was deeply personal.
Very personal. He blamed the she-wolf, meaning the insatiable greed of the church, the corruption of the politicians, the avarice of the Florentine bankers for the literal destruction of his life.
Because that greed is what caused his exile.
Exactly. You can hide from a violent lion, but you cannot hide from his systemic rot that corrupts everything it touches. The she-wolf actively hunts him. She doesn't just stand in his way, she moves against him step by step, pushing him backward down the slope.
He writes that she thrusts him back where the sun is silent, which is just an incredible use of synesthesia.
It's beautiful poetry.
The light doesn't just fade, right? It goes mute. He is losing his connection to divine illumination completely.
He is sliding back into the dark wood, entirely defeated. I mean, his intellect failed, his will failed, and his courage failed.
He's at rock bottom.
It is only at this absolute rock bottom moment, when human agency is zero, that a figure materializes in the vast desert before him.
And this figure is described in Italian as fioco, someone who seemed from long-continued silence hoarse.
Yes, the word fioco. The scholars have debated the precise meaning of fioco for centuries.
Really? Why is that?
Well, does it mean he is visually faint, appearing dim like a ghost because he belongs to the shadows? Or does it mean his voice is literally hoarse because the voice of reason hasn't been spoken or listened to in a very long time?
Oh, I love that second interpretation. But whichever it is, Dante is terrified and cries out, begging for pity, whether the figure is a spirit or a real man.
And the figure replies that he was once a man, that he lived under the Emperor Augustus in the time of the false and lying gods, and that he was a poet who sang of Aeneas.
So we know this is Virgil, the titan of Roman literature.
The one and only.
But practically speaking, why is a 14th century Christian poet using a 1st century BCE pagan as his ultimate spiritual guide? Like, isn't that a conflict?
It creates a fascinating theological friction, for sure. Virgil represents the absolute pinnacle of human reason and classical wisdom. In the medieval mindset, he was deeply revered.
Right.
But Dante is establishing a harsh rule here regarding the architecture of salvation. Human reason is necessary to diagnose the disease, but it cannot provide the cure.
Ah, okay.
Reason can guide you away from the immediate danger of the dark wood. It can analyze the nature of sin.
So reason can walk you through the mechanics of your own failures, which is why Virgil guides him through Hell and Purgatory. But reason hits a ceiling.
Exactly. Virgil explicitly tells Dante that because he was rebellious to his law, meaning he lived before Christ, and did not worship the Christian God, he is barred from the city of paradise.
He literally cannot enter.
No. To reach the stars, Dante will eventually require a different guide, Beatrice, who represents divine grace and theology. Reason gets you to the threshold, but faith must take you across it.
But before they can even begin this massive descent into the underworld, Virgil has to give Dante a reason to keep moving, right? Because Dante is terrified.
Yes, he needs motivation.
So Virgil delivers a prophecy about the she-wolf. It's one of the most cryptic, fiercely debated passages in the entire Divine Comedy, the prophecy of the Veltro or the Greyhound.
Virgil promises the terrified Dante that the she-wolf will not rule the world forever. A greyhound is coming who will hunt the wolf down through every city and chase her back into the depths of hell where envy first unleashed her.
And Virgil gives us a few clues about this greyhound's identity. He says the greyhound won't feed on earth or wealth, meaning he can't be bribed or corrupted by the very avarice he is fighting.
Right.
But will feed instead on wisdom and on love and virtue. And then there is this incredibly ambiguous geographical clue. Twixt Feltro and Feltro shall his nation be.
The famous Feltro and Feltro.
What does that actually mean? Like, do the commentators have a consensus on who Dante was predicting?
There is zero consensus, and that is likely by design.
Really? No consensus at all?
None. The theories are vast. Some historical scholars argue the greyhound represents a political savior, perhaps a Holy Roman emperor like Arrigo VII, who Dante hoped would march into Italy, crush the warring factions, and restore secular order.
Okay, that makes sense historically.
Others point to a powerful local lord, like Congrande della Scala, who would later become Dante's patron in exile.
But what about the word feltro? Doesn't that translate to felt, like the fabric?
Yes, and that opens up an entirely different avenue of interpretation. If feltro means felt cloth, it could refer to the coarse, humble robes worn by the Franciscan order.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so in this spiritual reading, the greyhound isn't an emperor with an army. It is a future, pure-hearted pope or a religious reformer who will strip the church of its wealth and return it to its foundational virtues of poverty and love.
It kind of functions like a medieval Rorschach test.
That's exactly what it is.
You look at the greyhound and you see whatever type of savior you believe the corrupted world needs most.
The ambiguity is the point.
Yeah.
The greyhound isn't necessarily a specific man on a horse. It is the embodiment of Dante's desperate, unshakable hope that systemic corruption is not the final chapter of human history.
Right.
It is the promise that justice is eventually coming.
So we've unpacked the theology, the politics, and the medieval mindset. But what does this map mean for you, the listener, today? Because obviously we aren't exiled Florentines worrying about 14th century church politics.
No, we certainly are not.
Yet the psychology of Canto 1 remains completely intact.
It remains intact because the human tendency towards self-deception hasn't changed.
Exactly. Canto 1 teaches us a brutal truth about personal transformation. When you wake up and realize you are lost in the dark wood of your own life, when you recognize that the path you are walking is destructive, you cannot simply scramble straight up the sunlit hill to a quick fix.
No shortcuts.
You cannot life hack your way out of a spiritual crisis. Your will is too encumbered. The beasts of your own habits, your pride, and your insatiable appetites will block the shortcut and push you right back into the dark.
There is no bypass. You have to rely on reason, your inner Virgil, to guide you the long, hard way around.
Yeah.
To heal, you first have to descend. You have to actively look at the darkest, ugliest, most deeply ingrained parts of your own underworld.
Which is terrifying.
It is. But you must understand the anatomy of your own failures before you can ever hope to ascend the mountain toward the light. It demands a fundamental, painful confrontation with the self.
Which brings us back to that terrifying realization at the beginning. If you are lost, there is no blue dot to save you. You have to walk through the shadows.
You do.
But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, applying Dante's medieval map to our current reality. Consider the she-wolf of modern society, that insatiable, systemic drive for more.
The endless loop.
The endless loop of consumption that leaves us feeling emptier and hungrier than we were before we started scrolling, buying, or achieving. If that she-wolf of endless acquisition is alive and well, stalking the landscape of our culture today, Who or what is our greyhound?
That is the question.
What profound force of wisdom, love, and virtue are we waiting on to finally chase that wolf back into the shadows?
A vital question, and perhaps one we all need to answer for ourselves as we navigate our own woods.
Thanks for exploring the dark wood with us. Until next time.